these scenarios are created so that the individual can do their best in this contrived situation. Usually it's in a room where there's no sounds, no distractions. Usually you're facing a screen and you're facing a person and you're answering the questions and you're given the time. So we really try and take out as many of the distractors and as many of the stressors as possible. But that's not what you're going to experience in everyday life. So we try and understand not just the number, but also what is that number going to look like in an everyday environment. So if you're a student and you're performing right on the cusp, meaning your brain is doing what it does in a typical way when there's no distractors, imagine what's going to happen when you have a lot of distractors. There are a number of factors that can actually kind of impact your score. So one of the things I talked about previously is the bell curve, having the norms and the standard deviations, but I also talked about something called the confidence interval. Each index score or standard score that is calculated falls within what we call a true score. So we calculate a confidence interval. Usually you'll see at 95% confidence, which gives us a 5% error rate. And that means we are 95% confident that your true score, that score that you receive, that average score, that number, will fall within a particular range. So if 89 is where a person is performing, that's their average score, their range might actually be somewhere between 86 and 91. So that means at any given time, they might be performing a little bit lower, or remove some of the distractors, they could perform a little bit higher. So given that, when you're given these numbers and you understand the confidence interval and you understand that you're doing testing in this contrived situation, it doesn't necessarily mean that the number you're getting is the whole picture. What you're getting is a snapshot that tells us when everything is controlled, your brain is able to use this particular function, this particular part of the brain. And as I say part of the brain, I just want to clarify, we used to think that the brain was domain specific, meaning only certain parts of the brain function in a certain way, when in reality, it's actually very systems oriented, where all parts of the brain are working together at once. So if one part is impacted, it can impact another part too. So just a little bit of neuro history. It means that when we look at the score, we're saying that the way that this part of the brain is functioning is pretty good. However, you step into a situation that might be a little more taxing, we may see lower performance, or you step into a situation that is like perfectly centered around this individual, we might see a little bit of a higher performance. So we just want to be mindful of what these numbers mean in relation to a person's environment. If you think about your own particular ability, can you manage, let's say 20 plus things in a given situation, keeping it all in mind, making sure everything is handled, making sure everything is put together in an organized fashion? Do you think that that would be a realistic expectation for anyone? Most often that's not. 20 things is a lot. The average amount of information that a human can hold in mind has been identified as 7 plus or minus 2. So 20, unfortunately, is the number of things that most people are trying to manage at any given time. Not simply because they want to, but because we have so many inputs coming in. Most people, I myself included, will spend an inordinate amount of time on their device, whether it's a phone, a laptop. And so you're taking in a lot, and that can really overwhelm your system. So if someone is feeling like I really can't remember anything, or I'm feeling like I can't solve things like I used to, there's a number of factors that can be impacting a person's performance. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are low performers or they're underperforming when it comes to testing. Often, this is why we do a history or a background and we learn about a person's current functioning. Because if we get through the testing and everything is looking fine, like your brain is working the way that we would expect it to be, meaning that they're falling in the average range or maybe above, then we want to know what is draining their ability, because most often it is a number of things that are falling on their plate. Self-care is super important, and most people don't sleep well. Most people aren't nourishing themselves well. They're not taking breaks like they should. They're constantly overstimulating themselves. So some of the concerns that people come into testing with, well, why can't I do this? Why is this not working the way that it used to? Is not an impact of the brain not functioning. So we'll do the testing and we'll find actually your scores are in the average range, in a range that shares that your brain is functioning in the way that it's supposed to. But you might want to take some things off your plate. We have gotten to the habit of doing too much, and it's really impacting our functioning. And when that happens, instead of thinking about how overloaded we are, we think about there's something wrong with my brain. And that's really the gist of, so I'm just average. And so it's not just about being average, it's understanding that your brain is working in a capacity that it's supposed to, but that it's also being overwhelmed.